Hello, welcome to another episode of The Albums That Shaped Me. And in this episode, I'm going to be talking about what Judas Priest's Killing Machine led on to. So with a lot of these earlier episodes, there is a common denominator, and I've mentioned it, I think, in most of the episodes I've done so far. And I will mention it again in case this is the first time you've jumped into the series. But I have two younger brothers, and we had like a musical alliance, an agreement if you like. So all of us were into rock, hard rock, early metal in varying capacities. Probably me and my youngest brother had the biggest sort of crossover in terms of bands we liked. My middle brother liked the Police, but liked other bands as well, and in the sort of hard rock area. And so what we did is we came to this understanding that, in terms of what bands we would buy albums for, and in that way we could sort of listen to them together, mainly on a Sunday afternoon, but other times. And it was great. It made our purchasing power go a lot forward, a lot further. So my youngest brother's band, his allocated area was Judas Priest. And the first cassette he bought, probably had bought for him actually, although I have mentioned the car washing business, and I think obviously a bit of birthday money as well. Because I think we used to get spending money when we used to go and stay at my grandparents' in the summers, and I think initially we all used to buy models and make them with my granddad, but then occasionally one of us might buy music or something. So I remember at some point him buying the cassette of Killing Machine. In the US, I believe it's called Hellbent for Leather. It has an extra track on it as well. The UK version didn't have Green Man Alicia on it, actually. That was added to the US version. I subsequently later on own albums by Judas Priest in multiple formats, which we'll get onto in a moment. Yeah, so in terms of the first album I listened to all the way through, it would have been this, although it wasn't when it came out. I'm having trouble pinpointing it. I think it may have been 79. I'm going to talk about some other associations which help me pin it down a little bit. I suppose how we got into Judas Priest, or were made aware of them, was the single Take on the World, which was played on Top of the Pops. If you look at Judas Priest's single releases, in terms of UK charting, you can see Take on the World was the first time it got in the charts, number 14, which is pretty good. And that would have been in 79. That came out. When did it give me the exact date? Yeah, 5th of January 79. So that was the first time we would have been properly aware of the band. So sometime after 79, but no later than, well, I know it's no later than Point of Entry. So maybe just before British Steel, just after. So sometime in the 80s was when my brother bought Killing Machine. And yeah, we listened to that a lot. I had it on cassette. We listened to it on my dad's hi-fi. And then I suppose really what then happened was, I reckon it would have been around this time he bought it, because I remember seeing Living After Midnight, and then he said Living Machine there, Living After Midnight, Breaking the Law, all getting heavy play, in terms of there was a program on called Tis Was on a Saturday morning, like a kids' Saturday morning program. But they used to have bands in the studio. They used to play music videos, and I remember seeing Living After Midnight, Breaking the Law being played on Tis Was, and then going down to my friend's house, ones I've mentioned in previous episode, who I got into Rush through them, and we used to listen to Queen and stuff like that, and saying, "Oh, did you see Judas Priest on Tis Was?" But yeah, so I suppose around this time would have been when we first listened to Killing Machine. Then my youngest brother proceeded to sort of infill with stuff as a result of buying Unleashed in the East. And this is a phenomenon, I don't know if anybody out there has a similar thing, but a lot of times then we'd buy live albums, and then we'd use the live album to sort of track down, go, "Oh, that's interesting, we haven't heard that track." And then as a result, when we went into the record store, we could sort of see which tracks were on which albums, and then do it from there. And then so say, well, okay, well, this is interesting. If you look at Unleashed in the East, there seems to be a lot of tracks off of it on Sad Wings of Destiny, that sort of thing. So so you were basically working out like what other studio albums had the most amount of tracks on them from the live album, and sort of do it from that. That would be the stuff I was most familiar with. So at one point, I think he subsequently sold them actually, a lot later. He had all of these. And then it wasn't until... So I'll come on in a moment, actually talk a bit about seeing them live, but point of entry around this time in 81, I'd started work... When did this come out? February 81, so I started later on in the year, and they toured in November of 81. But I remember my brother buying this, and that year, 81, was when I went to see them live. He was pretty young at that point, so yeah, I remember him really kicking up a fuss at the time. I don't know, I'm trying to think how old he would have been at the time, because there's about like 6 years age difference between us, so I would have been 17 at the time. So yeah, he would have been 9, I think. Hang on, what am I saying? That's not right, is it? Sorry, 11. He was, that actually, was that right? No. Yeah, 10 or 11. Round about when he got into them. So yeah, sometime around then. And because the reason what's confusing me is I remember him doing something at school, and he was still at junior school, and it was some sort of, I don't know, where a group of his friends, I remember them creating all these like paper guitars and miming to something, and originally they were going to do Accept, and I'll come on to the connection between Accept in a moment. So yeah, that's interesting actually. Why? Yeah, 81. So it's funny, isn't it, how you have these. I've been noticing the other day, my memories get a bit blurred, and I remember things, but when I check the dates, I'm thinking, well, that can't line up quite right. It doesn't seem right, like. Sure, my brother would have been slightly older at that point, but yeah, maybe it was his last year, because thinking about it, his birthday's earlier in the year, so he may have gone up to secondary school a little bit later because of that. I can't remember where the cut-off is, so that could explain it actually. So maybe it was his last year of junior school. So because in the UK, like junior, so primary, junior, and then secondary school, and you go from junior school to secondary school between the ages of about 11 and 12, somewhere around there. So yeah, that probably was. So he would have been about, I think, 11 at the time. So yeah, I didn't really think it appropriate, and I don't know it as well. I can't remember what the rules were about the live venue at that point when I went to see them. But yeah, I just remembered that on the fly. Actually, I completely forgot about that. Him really kicking up a fuss about not being able to go to the gig. So I'll post. This is the Judas Priest have posted the performance on Top of the Pops of Take on the World. It's pretty funny, actually. Yeah, we really loved the theatrics. I think that's Les Binks actually still. I'll post this as well. So this is a thing called 20th Century Box. It's mainly about Iron Maiden, but it's got a really funny bit in it where the documentarians visit this club in London, which is like a heavy metal disco, and they were all starting up around 1980, 81, and there's these two guys doing air guitar with these cutouts. And these two guys sort of went on to be minor celebrities at the time. Everybody knew who they were as a result, partially of this program, actually. I think one of them was called Rob Loonhouse. And they're miming to Hellbent for Leather, which is quite pretty amusing. So yeah, like I said, this is, I suppose once we listen to Killing Machine, this was the next purchase my brother made, and then from that we sort of built out from that, really, or he did primarily. And as I've said, he sort of went back through the back catalogue and started infilling. Then really we had a bit of a gap where we didn't listen to them at all, and he got sort of big in, I suppose, later on to more into Stone Roses, I think, a lot later, which have been quite a bit later, but also was interested in sort of UK dance music, and but more of the bands that did dance music as well through the sort of period here. So his sort of musical tastes diverged a bit, although we did, our taste did reconnect. I remember he sort of got into grunge a lot later, and I remember him just incessantly playing what was it, a Nirvana Nevermind, over and over and over again, and he had some early Soundgarden stuff as well, I think. So yeah, so our musical tastes have sort of reconverged over the years. And then I remember buying Screaming for Vengeance was the first album that I bought. So I sort of, if you like, our musical allegiances sort of broke at that point, and we, as I got more disposable income, I suppose, I was interested in sort of buying stuff by them, and he'd sort of lost interest, I think, a little bit at that point. So yeah, I went out, bought this when it came out. Didn't really keep up with the band, and then got back into them for a little while around 85, I think, when I listened to Defenders of the Faith. Lost interest again, and then became aware of them, actually, funnily enough, around the time when they split up, or should I say Rob Halford left the band, and then I got back into them around this period, and I'll talk about how that ties into seeing them live as well. So as I mentioned, something else as well, in parallel with this, I had another friend that was big into the band. So around about this time, I started going to, I'd been to Brighton record fairs on and off over the years, starting about the late 90s. I found this really interesting history of Brighton and Hove record shops, if anybody is aware of Brighton It's got this really, really long article that goes through like all the various record shops that have been in Brighton. If you're interested in that sort of thing, yeah, it's fascinating. Yeah, there's a bit about Brighton record fairs here. They used to be at the Brighton Centre a lot, and I became aware of them in the 90s. Someone I worked with used to go down all the time, and a load of us, when they started, used to all go down together, check them out. And then I started going again late 90s, 2000s with a different friend. And as a result, I started to get hold of all this like more obscure Judas Priest stuff. So coloured vinyl, started buying some of the albums that my brother had on vinyl, and then buying singles as well. And so tracking down, I got pretty actually obsessed with the band around the 2000s, to the point where I actually had a website, like a fan site, which was pretty large, and me and this friend sort of put together I wanted to learn about web design, HTML, so that's one of the reasons for doing it. I was working for myself at that point, and it was before I actually took a formal web applications development course. But yeah, I put together this, or we put together this website all about Judas Priest. The funny thing was, and I'm assuming it was him. It was on something like GeoCities, and let me just refresh my memory of the guy's name. So if I go back, jumping around a bit here, but it's part of the fun. Let me just see where it starts off with the history. Yeah, so this is good. They go back to the original start of the band. For a little while, I wasn't aware that they existed. In '69, I was started around this time, but there was an incarnation of Judas Priest without Rob Halford, and it had Al Atkins as the vocalist. It's interesting if you can actually track down recordings from that time. He subsequently went on and re-recorded some stuff later on. I think there was some recordings floating around, like some demos or some various stuff like that. Halford joined in 73, and it was originally, you can see here, like there's no original members here. And so what actually happened was Al Atkins originally sort of disbanded Judas Priest, then ended up rehearsing with a band called Freight, which is where KK Downing and Ian Skull Hill, apparently as he's called, come into the picture. And he joined the band and then suggested that why don't they use the name Judas Priest. And then at some point in the future, he was replaced by Halford, and then subsequently Glenn Tipton joined the band. So it's a really interesting thing to read about. So the website, I actually had a book I'd picked up which was really good and went back to the early days before Halford, back to 69. I think you'll even see, if you look at the really early album, there's a writing credit actually to Al Atkins somewhere here. Let me just try and find it. I'm really digressing here, but that's part of the reason why I do it in this format. Yeah, there you go, Winter. And you get some credits here. Did he still have stuff on Sad Wings? I can't remember. I think Sad Wings features a track, is it? Victim of Changes, yeah. Victim of Changes was originally called something like Whiskey Woman. And there's a really early recording. I think it's still got Rob Halford on it. Or it has at that point. It doesn't go back. I don't think it's earlier than 73. But there's a Reading Festival recording somewhere, I think, with a version of this with slightly different lyrics, and maybe it's still called Whiskey Woman. My knowledge is a bit wobbly on that, but I remember in the early days of downloading, there were various copies of like early Judas Priest bootlegs floating around. So yeah, that was interesting to go back and at different points in my life, like re-explore the band. And as I did it, it expanded out. So yeah, there's been a really long-term, both direct and indirect absorption of the band over the years. So lost my train of thought here. The Al Atkins business. So after we completed the site, I had a contact email on there, and I got an email purportedly from Al Atkins thanking me for actually writing that far back in time, because I think probably he doesn't, at that time he didn't necessarily get, people didn't really know his connection to Judas Priest, but subsequently it's quite a well, described story, just because I think people are interested in saying, well, Judas Priest existed as a band name, slightly different line, way back in '69. So yeah. So we've got Screaming for Vengeance, and when I saw them, the first time I saw them live, I've got the order up here. Let me bring this back here. Messed up my order. Oh, this is tagged together, that's why. Okay. Right, let me try and do this. I've managed to really mess up here. Let me ungroup that. That's better. I've inadvertently grouped that by dragging it. So, Point of Entry comes out in 81, and so I've jumped back a little bit in time here. Point of Entry comes out in 81, and I actually went to see them in Crawley on the final leg of the European tour. Yeah, final leg of the European tour. At that point, when I saw them, Accept was supporting. They weren't being supported by Def Leppard in Crawley. They must have been on other parts of the tour, other venues. So yeah, there's the tour dates. You can see it's a pretty long tour. And there it is there. Crawley Leisure Centre. So Accept was supporting. And it was Judas Priest were promoting Point of Entry. We'll come on to Accept in a moment. And then I saw them a lot later in 2001 with this friend that I did the website for, and when I sort of got back into the band and started going to record fairs, we saw them at the London Astoria, which is no longer there. And yeah, they had Savatage supporting. It was a really good gig, but of course at that point Ripper Owens was fronting the band, but they were awesome live with Ripper playing. And the cool thing was, at the end of 2000s, into 2000s, I quite liked there being two bands, because there was Halford, and there was Judas Priest. So we actually had seen Halford a few months earlier in the 2000s at the LA2, I think it was, because there used to be two venues there. And he would been promoting his first solo album, Halford, funnily enough. And he had an awesome backing band, but they played loads of like obscure Judas Priest stuff, off of things like Stained Class as well. Like some deeper album cuts. So yeah, that was pretty cool, and I did really enjoy the lineup of Judas Priest with Ripper Owens. I still have my T-shirt from the Demolition tour. I should do a video actually on my tour shirts that I've still managed to are still around. And then I saw them again when they came through Halifax in 2015. They had Mastodon as support. The thing I remember most of this gig is I had a bad knee. A really bad knee. I could only just stand up. And I remember like limping along to see the band with my wife. And we were actually in a seated area down the front. But we were standing up as well to see the band. So I'd have to like every so often sit down because my knee was so painful. That week I'd been like crawling under desks at work, working on computers, and the constant like up and down on my knee had caused like an area of it to swell. It was like super painful. Fortunately, it went down with no long-term issues. It would appear, based on the dates, that they would have been supporting Redeemer of Souls. It was a really good gig. At this time, KK Downing was already out of the band. Richie Faulkner was playing, and I think they had this really cool thing with like backdrops, this massive like electronic. I must be using like I don't know thousands of LEDs. I suppose I don't know what they now use nowadays for that stuff, but it would like project up album covers, stuff like that. And lots of other bands do that actually when they play. I've seen bands do it with interchangeable backdrops where stuff will come across representing the different album covers. And when I first saw it done, it was just done with these huge material, sheets of material. And then nowadays it's sort of moved onto these huge screens where they just project up the album covers. Now, the only band I really want to talk about in terms of associating with Judas Priest, because mainly my consumption of Judas Priest was in parallel with the whole Nawubum thing. So I don't know if there's any band particularly, apart from Accept, that I listen to specifically as a result of listening to Judas Priest, apart from obviously spin-off things like being made aware of Al Atkins' work, being aware of the solo albums that people have done, the material that came about as a result of Rob Halford leaving the band, through, was it Fight, and the one he did with, was it John 5, that 2 album, the concept album that was, I think, there's a couple of different versions of that actually album, if you can track it down, but there's a 2 album which was a collaboration between him and John 5, and I think there's like a Trent Reznor mix, which is the one that was, I think, released, but then there's also an alternative mix as well, if you're curious. There's also a pretty controversial promo video for one of the tracks as well, which caused quite a stir at the time. Yeah, so another band really where listening to Judas Priest just led me to listen to more Judas Priest, and then various spin-offs. I didn't really get too much into the bands which had similar like high octane vocalists, like I think it's Primal Fear. I'm trying to think of all the people that auditioned when Ripper Owens auditions, and there's a number of vocalists who have a similar style of vocals, and I didn't really get into those bands, but one band I did get into, and that was a result of seeing Judas Priest live in '81, was Accept, because they were Support. And I was really impressed by this band because it's the first time I'd seen a band with, like, not only were they throwing shapes, but it was also seemed to be incredibly choreographed. I was right down the front, and again, not sure if this is a misremembering, but I remember being able to see the stage, because the stage was a little bit low, so I could see the my head was high enough to just see the floor of the stage. And the two big things I noticed about that gig, one was that Judas Priest didn't seem to be using a back line. You couldn't see the amps. It looked like everything was just going through this massive wall of, like, just a PA, which was also on the side but behind them. And Judas Priest the guitarist came out of these boxes. And anyway, I'd noticed that the stage was covered with all these, like, white electrical tape markings that they taped on, and it looked like they were the sort of points for Accept or whatever to go to. That's how it looked to me. I mean, possibly not, because they were only the support band, but it was rather amusing to see this band, like, with these incredibly well choreographed moves. And of course, I'm trying to remember if Halford actually did come on with a bike or not. I'm not sure for that one. The stage had all these steps on it, and these two boxes that the guitarist came out of, that Judas Priest came out of. And I think that was the one where Halford got his whip stuck in the side of the stage as well. So yeah, it was a pretty eventful gig. Awesome sound as well, because everything was just fed through this, like, amazing PA. Or that, again, that's the way it seemed to me. I just couldn't see, any Marshall stacks or anything. So yeah, that 81 gig was very memorable, as were all the gigs later on. And as a consequence of seeing Accept, I bought this album. It took me about 2 or 3 attempts to get the album. When it came in, I ordered it through a record store, and it was damaged. And so they bought me another one, and that was also damaged. Now, the record wasn't damaged, just the sleeve. But the guy owning the record shop said, "Oh, we could keep going with this for ages, because it could possibly be the whole box. And if you're the only one that's really, as they were, like, buying it off the distributor directly, and it's just being pulled out of that box each time." Because I don't know how popular Accept were in the UK at that point. That was quite a possibility, owing to the fact we got another one where there was this sort of damage in the top. It was actually a cut. I don't know if it was also it might have been some marking of the album. It was very weird. He just said, "Oh, well, we can carry on this further, or I can give you, like, I don't know, £1 off or something." So I went for the reduced album cover, because it didn't really cause a problem. Yeah, so Breaker by Accept. And I'm actually trying to remember whether my brother had a copy of this as well, because as a result of this, he got into the band, the one that was big into Judas Priest. So yeah, I think I've still got a copy of this on vinyl. I'm not sure. Again, a little foggy on the memory there. Because I remember buying it. So unless I gave it to him. Yeah. And then, as a consequence, yeah, started buying albums by them, every year up until 85, and then lost interest a little bit. So I'm going to do my customary thing here. Now we've got to the end. Sorry that this has been a bit all over the place, but part of the reasons I like doing this is it suddenly makes me think of things that happened that I didn't necessarily think of when I was putting the tabs together, which is one of the reasons why I really like doing this series. So I've done my usual thing in Bing Chat of getting it to do a process this prompt, I suppose, where one of them deals with bands in the same era. So you can see here 5 bands, 5 albums: Iron Maiden, Black Sabbath, Motorhead, Accept and Saxon. And then the other one is for just any band in a similar style to Judas Priest: Iron Maiden, Accept, Saxon, Dio, Primal Fear, funnily enough. Ralph Sheepers, that was the guy who I was trying to think of. Once considered a replacement for Rob Halford in Judas Priest. Very similar sound, style. Interesting, when you think about bands like Accept as well, and Judas Priest, big influences on power metal, big influences on the faster stuff that came later, like thrash and speed as well. Some of their faster tempo tracks, particularly Accept. I think it even acknowledges it in the Wikipedia write-up. Accept also been around since '76 and earlier, actually, in a different form. And it was quite fun with this band, going back and trying to discover this really early stuff. It took me a while to end up listening to these albums. I think really as a result of Spotify. I don't know. I'm trying to remember if I have this or I had a compilation of the early stuff on cassette. I think I might have a compilation of like the first couple of albums on cassette, actually. And one other thing, done my usual running of my little Python scripts. Here's the one for LastFM, the API. So you can sort of see here some of the closest matches based on what other people play when they play Judas Priest. So the top album is British Steel. And you've got Halford, Resurrection, Holy Diver, Denim and Leather, Accept, and so on. And you can see there's a few of later speed and thrash bands. Of course, Halloween. And then this is my little very quick and dirty Pareto analysis from the Spotify API. Saxon, Accept, Halford, Dio, Judas Priest, Heaven and Hell, Sabotage, and so on. So there we have it. Hopefully you enjoyed me reminiscing about getting into Judas Priest and all the the interesting things sometimes happens with bands where you wax and wane and then you find someone else that's into the band, or you hear the track on the radio that gets you back into the band again. And with this band, it's probably the band where I've most multiply bought stuff. So I now have a number of albums on vinyl as a result of the Brighton Record Fair. I probably had these albums on cassette, various ones. I've got, I think, probably all of the ones up to the more recent stuff on CD. Everything probably up to and including Angel of Retribution, including that sort of nice, builder box set that they did, where they released, I think, a container with, I think, 3 CDs in it, and then you could buy the rest of them, and they're all the extended versions with the extra tracks they threw on, including the fact that for the live album they added in that extra 7-inch EP. This super annoys me because I've managed to get hold of a version of this in vinyl with the 7-inch EP, and I can't find the 7-inch EP. And I know I had it because my copy has the 7-inch, has the sleeve for it in there, and somewhere it's gone missing. I don't know when I moved, or when I got rid of a hi-fi item years ago and accidentally left it on the platter, maybe, I don't know. I remember having it on, I remember it being sitting on my record player for quite a while at some point. So yeah, but the only upside is I do have the CD version of this with this 7-inch EP as the bonus tracks on it. So yeah, all is not lost. I even retrospectively bought, in the era of CDs, I actually bought Demolition on vinyl. I think I got quite a nice red vinyl version. So that was in the 2000s, the early 2000s, where bands would, had I suppose an uneasy relationship with vinyl, but they were releasing often special coloured vinyl versions on vinyl of various albums. But their new releases, in this case Demolition. So yeah, lots of different versions on different formats of albums by this band. Thanks once again for watching. Bye for now, and I will catch you in the next episode.